Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
I think this was a message that was sent certainly to me, to our government from British Columbians, that they expect us to do better.
At this stage, I would not be looking at offering one of our members to be Speaker.
Back to work. Premier David Eby and Opposition Leader John Rustad ready themselves and their MLAs after the NDP is asked to form government. Plus,
they also contained inconsistent and unknown quantities of THC and other potentially harmful substances.
not so sweet warning. Mounties seize a huge swath of cannabis-laced candy edibles they say could be contaminated. And
So anything starts with fire, so it's purification. So we always say anything we do, any puja, any celebration, we always light a fire.
people in BC are busy preparing for Diwali celebrations, which coincide with Halloween this year.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. BC's Premier and Opposition Leader are back in Victoria, preparing to get back to work. 10 days after the provincial election, voters have given the NDP another mandate, an historic third straight. But as Chad Pawson reports, leaders now need to find a way to work together after a bitter, divisive, and negative campaign.
David Eby back in the BC legislature, back again as Premier, but just barely.
I think this was a message that was sent certainly to me, to our government from British Columbians, that they expect us to do better on a number of key files.
More than 2 million voters cast ballots in this election, around 58% of eligible voters, but it came down to the count of some 20,000 absentee ballots. They made the difference, giving the BC NDP at least 46 seats in the 93-seat legislature, with a potential for one more. That's if the NDP lead in Surrey-Guildford holds up to a judicial review. It's at 27 votes. No matter, political scientists say this new NDP government will need to be more collaborative.
Logistical considerations make it difficult to govern with a majority of one, so that all makes it more likely that the NDP would look for some kind of cooperation.
And David Eby is promising that, but has some terms, alluding to controversial comments made by Conservative candidates who will now sit in the legislature.
My commitment to every MLA that was elected is if you share our values around making sure this is a welcoming province for everyone, that we're going to fight hate and racism, these are non-negotiables for us, then we're happy to work with you to make sure that the legislature behind me works for British Columbians.
The BC Green Party says its 2 elected MLAs are ready for this, saying government works best when MLAs collaborate and prioritize their constituents over party interest to deliver those outcomes. And what about the Conservatives? For one, John Rustad says Marina Sapoznikoff, who made racist, hurtful comments about Indigenous people, would be dropped from any future elections. She lost a close contest in Wanda Fuka-Malahat. Clearing that up, John Rustad still took a shot at Eby.
All the way through the campaign, David Eby, quite frankly, was a habitual liar about who we are, about what we did, about our platform.
Rustad says his plan now is to create an effective opposition to, yes, work collaboratively with David Eby, but only as long as it helps people Rustad tried to reach.
The average everyday working person in this province, if there are things that are moved forward that will improve those lives for those people, we would be looking at supporting it. But if he's going to carry forward with the destructive policies that he has, then yes, we're going to look at every opportunity possible to bring him down as soon as possible.
So, what now? Well, first are judicial reviews, one in Surrey and another in Kelowna. If those results hold up, that David Eby will move to appoint a new cabinet and ready a vote for MLAs to appoint a new speaker, which he says could come from any party. David Eby wants BC's new legislature to begin working together for the province by this fall. Chad Pawson, CBC News, Vancouver.
The BC Conservative MLA for Surrey-Cloverdale, meanwhile, says she is interested in collaborating with New Democrats and working with her Conservative colleagues to address public perceptions following some of those controversial comments.
I think that there's a lot of work for us to do to build the trust of British Columbians, to ensure that they see Conservatives of BC as a party that is capable and able to represent all British Columbians. We want to be able to, heal political divisions wherever they come from, whether it's as a result of comments made on social media or any other platform.
Sturcos says the Conservatives intend to be a strong opposition, and she looks forward to working with her colleagues, many of whom she's meeting for the first time. The provincial election also has implications for Vancouver's municipal politics. City Councillor Christine Boyle has announced she is resigning as she begins her new role as New Democrat MLA. Boyle is one of 49 women elected to serve in the legislature. It is the first time in provincial history that women will outnumber men in the chamber. The last cruise ship of the season departed from Canada Place this week, marking the end of a record-breaking season for the Port of Vancouver.
Our Canada Place cruise terminal actually welcomed 327 cruise ships, as well as 1.32 million cruise passengers, which set another record over our 2023 passenger record by about 80,000 cruise passengers.
The Port Authority says passengers visiting Vancouver injected more than $1 billion into the local economy, something the manager of one store in Gastown is very grateful for.
It's been a good summer for us. It started early with the cruise ships this year, so it kind of like propelled us that way, which is kind of nice.
An economic impact study from earlier this year found passengers, crew, and cruise lines spend more than $1 billion locally every year, including an average of $450 each on hotels, restaurants, shopping, tours, and other local attractions. Hundreds of nurses have gathered in Penticton as the BC Nurses Union begins a series of regional bargaining conferences. The union president says the provincial election has shown the government health care is a priority for many voters.
I do feel hopeful. You know, the NDP government was the first government in Canada to commit to minimum nurse-patient ratios, and now that it sounds like they formed government, at least today they have, I think that bodes well for the work that we've already started.
The union says it's aiming to build its bargaining agenda between now and late January. Gear says significant gains were achieved in the last round of talks, but this time they're looking for more. Nurses are pushing for improvements around workloads, occupational health, and safety, as well as better working conditions. Bargaining will take place in February. If you have been to or from Vancouver International Airport relatively recently, listen up. Health officials are asking air travelers to watch out for symptoms after a passenger with measles traveled through YVR earlier this month. The BC Centre for Disease Control says the passenger arrived at Terminal M around 6 p.m. on October 16th on Philippine Airline PR 616, then left from gate B17 at 10:30 p.m. on Philippine Airline flight PR 3032. They did not visit any airports, businesses, or restaurants. Measles symptoms include fever, cough, runny nose, red eyes, and a rash that starts on the neck and face. And it spreads to the chest, arms, and legs, lasting about 4 to 7 days. Anyone with symptoms is asked to call their healthcare provider or HealthLink BC. That number is 811. Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet says he'll start talking with the federal Conservatives and federal NDP about bringing down the minority Liberal government. This comes after the Liberals failed to meet his demands to adopt 2 private members' bills related to seniors' benefits and supply management. Rafi Boudjikanian has more.
5 weeks after the Bloc Québécois set today as a deadline for the governing Liberals, they insist they mean it.
Have they come to us yesterday or the day before? No, we haven't got what we wanted.
In a letter to the other opposition parties, the Bloc wrote, "We clearly, publicly and repeatedly said this was a final deadline with no possible appeal. From now on, we will vote against the government during confidence motions as long as they are in the interests of Quebec."
If there's a vote tomorrow, they might fall tomorrow.
The Bloc had 2 requests, that Liberals push forward 2 pieces of legislation, one focused on raising pensions for seniors under the age of 74, and the other exempting supply management from international trade negotiations. But while the Bloc says it started chatting with the other parties, the NDP so far is showing no interest.
To be perfectly honest, it shows to me that the Bloc was unable to get the things that they needed for Canadians and for Quebecers. I'm pretty proud of our team. We've been successful at getting some of those really key pieces of legislation through. We'll continue to try to do that.
The Prime Minister also had thoughts to share.
Over the past number of weeks, I've had some very good conversations with Mr. Blanchet. we agree as a party that we need to work on supporting vulnerable people and doing more for our seniors. It's one of the reasons why we've been so enthusiastic about delivering dental care to so many seniors across the country. And we're going to continue to look for ways to help Canadians through these difficult times and work constructively with everyone in the House.
The Bloc's decision is only one of Trudeau's problems this week. He's also still dealing with some of his own MPs who want to force a vote in caucus for him to resign. And the Conservatives say now that they've got the Bloc on side to topple the Liberals, they will present another confidence motion as soon as possible, should the NDP indicate it will play ball too. Rafi Bijikani on CBC News, Ottawa.
A sea lion has been freed after getting badly entangled in netting off the coast of Vancouver Island. Rescuers say it's possible he had not eaten for months. The Vancouver Aquarium's Marine Mammal Rescue Society says the operation to save the sea lion was one of the most severe entanglements they have seen. The animal was spotted in October with netting wrapped around tightly its neck, muzzle, and the inside of his mouth. The society says rescues like this highlight the ongoing problem of marine debris. Darius Madavi is here with a look at the weather and some atmospheric moisture.
That's right, but no atmospheric river, to clarify. We've got a little bit of moisture in the air that's going to sweep across the province, but after that, we're looking pretty dry. That bit of moisture is going to swoop down into the States instead. So we've got a pretty dry weekend, it seems, coming up. We got a bit of rain coming tomorrow, and then pretty dry beyond that, which you can also see here. We're going to see that cloud move in. We're starting to see that rain come to parts of the island within the next few hours. We've also got a few wind warnings in place. That's probably going to be the bigger deal with this system coming in rather than the rain, which shouldn't be too significant. We're going to see wind gusts tonight up to 110 kilometers per hour, consistently 90, up to 110 gusting for Haida Gwaii and for the North Island. East coast of the island, especially northern sections, as well as Victoria, are going to see winds up to 70 kilometers per hour, gusting up to 90. And if we take a look here, you can see just that. Those winds gusting quite high here. Again, Campbell River seeing winds up to 70 kilometers per hour. Victoria seeing quite high as well. And so later in the show, Dan, we'll take a look at the precipitation coming across the island, which again, not too significant and should dry out by the time we get to trick-or-treating tomorrow.
That sounds good. Thanks, Darius.
On Thursday. Trick-or-treating on Thursday.
Very good. Don't go early. Well, as Halloween inches closer, police on Vancouver Island say they have seized a huge cache of cannabis-laced edibles that look like regular treats, kind of. Mounties say they grabbed more than 120,000 packages of pot edibles with wrappers that look similar to popular chocolate bars from dispensaries in Port Alberni and Lanceville. They have names like Dope Henry, Reefers, and THC Snickers. Police said the candy was produced in highly unsanitary and heavily contaminated trailers.
Or these counterfeit drug-laced snacks had been subjected to cross-contamination with numerous other drugs and substances. They also contained inconsistent and unknown quantities of THC and other potentially harmful substances.
Mounties also searched 5 homes linked to organized crime. They seized vehicles, guns, as well as cash. 6 people have been arrested. It is time to celebrate a pioneering colleague of ours here at CBC News BC. Reporter Belle Puri has been awarded the 2024 Bruce Hutchison Lifetime Achievement Award from the Jack Webster Foundation for her almost 50 years in journalism.
I have felt, and I still feel today, very fortunate to be able to listen, to look, to learn, and then simply talk about it. Sometimes I can fix a wrong, trigger a change, maybe even make a difference. Most days in this job, they're really good days, but those days are particularly good.
Puri's career began at radio station CKNW in 1977. She joined the CBC in 1992, covering local and national news, producing and hosting TV and radio shows. Her stories in the depths of the COVID-19 pandemic shone a light on the brutal stress felt by healthcare workers, patients, and their loved ones. She also served as a mentor, and still does, credited with paving the way for many journalists, particularly South Asian women and other people of color. Belle is also a wonderful friend. So congratulations, Belle. So well earned. A report into missing and disappeared Indigenous children forced into residential school says it's time for Canada to make reparations. That story's next.
I think it's important to give a human face to the stories that we hear every day, the people that they affect. And I think talking to those people is what really gives us the true sense of the impact of the stories that we're hearing.
Canada's special interlocutor on unmarked graves issued her final report today. It calls on Ottawa to establish an Indigenous-led commission to look into missing and disappeared Indigenous children. As Michelle Gassoub explains, the recommendations push Canada to take accountability for the deaths of thousands of Indigenous children.
The final report is sweeping, thousands of pages outlining 42 legal, moral, and ethical obligations in regards to children who did not return from residential schools.
First, that many of the missing children have in fact been disappeared by the state. Second, that there is an urgent need to establish a commission of investigations into the enforced disappearance of Indigenous children in Canada.
Among her recommendations, that Canada provide full reparations to the families of missing children and establishing a national Indigenous-led commission to investigate potential burial sites.
The Canadian legal framework is currently not equipped to provide adequate protections to these sites of truth before, during, and after the searches and investigations are done.
In May 2021, the Tecumloops Sechetnek First Nation in Kamloops announced the discovery of 215 potential unmarked graves at the site of a former residential school. In recent years, there has been a growing movement across Canada to deny those findings. In her announcement, Marie also recommended making that kind of residential school denialism illegal.
With the rise of, denialism, that's harmful. And it's also discriminatory. And we know the true impacts of Indian residential school.
Marie is also calling on federal, provincial, and territorial governments and institutions like churches to apologize for the harms they committed.
Looking at how it has actually affected everyone, not just us as First Nations, but all Canadians too.
Over 150,000 First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children were forced to attend church-run, government-funded residential schools between the 1870s and 1997. The legacy of those schools still being felt today. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
Veterans Affairs Canada says it is launching an investigation in the wake of a CBC News analysis that found some veterans may be paying too much for long-term care. Kate McKenna has the details from Ottawa.
Retired Colonel Michel Drapeau thinks Ottawa made a big mistake that's costing many Canadian veterans.
It's a kind of a slap in the face that these veterans who've given all they had not to be looked after properly and not to be looked after the way Parliament wanted them to be.
He's part of a team that's filed a proposed class action lawsuit claiming veterans have been paying too much for long-term care. Many veterans in care homes are only supposed to pay a cost of room and board that's equivalent to the least expensive province or territory. But when CBC News crunched the numbers, we found the Northwest Territories, where the price has been cheapest for decades, was left out of that calculation, meaning veterans could be paying more than $3,100 more per year than they should be.
We're not talking about millionaires here. We're talking at the, if not at the poverty level, something higher, but not very, very much.
Well, it doesn't make me feel very happy.
Judy Riopel's father, Carl Gunther Williscroft, served and spent his last 8 years in long-term care. She thinks he may have been shortchanged.
I actually think it's terrible that they would do that to somebody who served, to anybody, to any of us.
In a statement, the Minister of Veterans Affairs says, "I have tasked the department to investigate it further. As there is pending litigation, it would be inappropriate to comment."
We want to know who knew when and why didn't they fix it. So I think that's important. The second thing is they need to make it right.
Advocates say veterans deserve better.
Veterans Affairs Canada has one job, which is to support these veterans and their families, and they fail miserably time and again.
Michel Drapeau estimates that tens of thousands of veterans could have been affected, and advocates say that if a mistake was made, those veterans or their estates deserve compensation. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
Well, the morning started off snowy on Mount Seymour. There it is. Signs ski and snowboard season is just around the corner. Your BC-wide forecast with Darius Madavi is next. Planning a wedding is a labor of love, but it often comes with a very hefty price tag. To learn more about the true costs of tying the knot and what some couples may be doing to balance out some costs, we're joined by Genevieve McNally. She's a wedding planner and founder of Dream Group Weddings and Events. Genevieve, thanks for being here. First of all, how much are people spending on their weddings these days?
Oh, well, there's definitely a vast range depending on people's means and size of the wedding and what they're including. But I would say the majority are falling in the 50 to 70,000 for about 120 person wedding in the urban Vancouver area.
How does that compare with past years? Has it gone up significantly?
Absolutely. We've been talking a lot about that lately. I would say pre-pandemic, we were probably in the 35,000 to 50,000 range for the equivalent.
Wow. And what about, and is it just, for example, inflation? We've seen that make virtually everything more expensive. How is that affecting how couples plan?
Oh, well, definitely it's the inflation and sort of the effects of everything, you know, from butter in the grocery store to the cost of food and drinks in restaurants. And, you know, it definitely is felt in weddings. I'd say post-pandemic, 30 to 40% is sort of the range of increase in price.
And so what are some of the strategies perhaps that you're using with couples to manage wedding expenses or cut them?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest part of a wedding budget is going to go into your food and beverage with, you know, a hosted evening easily costing you $180 to $250 to $300 a person. So, you know, cutting guest numbers is going to be the biggest, most obvious, impactful way to cut your overall wedding budget. I mean, if you look at it, because there's your food and beverage, there's also all the other aspects of the wedding that can get averaged out. And $600 a guest is sort of the range of what it works out to. So you think, well, if I cut 20 guests, I'm cutting, you know, $8,000, $10,000 off my wedding budget. So it makes a big difference.
But possibly incurring some familial wrath, depending on the family, you have to say. Yeah, everyone's, because that seating chart can be murder for a lot of people. Are couples asking, for example, perhaps they're not doing gift registries these days. Are they asking for money? What's the trend there?
Yeah, I mean, you know, across the world, receiving money for a wedding is sort of customary. And in North America, we're told it's not polite to ask for money, but couples are just, you know, getting real. And it's sort of the expectation, you know, gift givers are giving money because they know every couple needs it and who doesn't want it. But couples are getting creative too. Like, you know, that we're seeing honeymoon funds and mortgage funds and date night funds, which that's great for the gift giver because they know the money's going towards something, something more just a night out. A dinner.
And probably at that moment more useful than somebody wanting a Cuisinart or a blender. Maybe they don't, or China, maybe they don't have a house to put it in. My goodness. Genevieve McNally, we really appreciate your time and your perspective on this. Thanks for letting us know.
Thank you for having me.
To another celebration. Now, preparations are in full swing for Diwali. And this year, they just happen to coincide with Halloween. Now, Diwali is a festival known for lights, color, and food celebrated by millions of people across the globe. Our Saurabh Sandhu hit the streets in Surrey to see what's on people's shopping lists this year.
This year's Diwali is pretty special for Nelson resident Ravi Dhoot. He's reuniting with his parents who traveled from India. They haven't seen each other for 7 years.
They could have landed in Castlegar, but we thought we need to bring all these things. Why not make it a trip?
Dhoot is making the most of this opportunity by shopping for Diwali in Surrey's Pile Business Centre.
We got our diyas, we got food items we needed to prepare, like all the masalas and all the spices.
Store shelves are lined up with special items, and lamps made up of clay are selling like hotcakes.
Anything starts with fire, so it's purification. So we always say anything we do, any puja, any celebration, we always light a fire.
And almost everyone has picked a favorite food they want to taste this Diwali.
Pakade, they're really nice. Some aloo paratha.
Shahi paneer, malai kofta, and naan, and raita, and roti.
And for those with a sweet tooth, Sweet shops are offering a wide range of exotic treats.
I've got a couple of more boxes there for my friends and family members. So I'll be going to their houses and wishing them Diwali.
For those hoping to keep their blood sugar in check, there are these fancy boxes filled with nuts.
People consider nuts more healthier and more nutrition. So they're buying sweets also plus nuts, so they can distribute to some other communities who doesn't eat sweets or they don't know much about it.
Meanwhile, at Lakshmi Narayan Hindu Temple, the celebration is more than just a party. It's also spiritual.
We usually come here on Diwali. We do, celebrate with, we light the diyas in temples. And it just give me a sort of, very homely feeling.
Next door at the Sikh temple, preparations are on for Bandi Chhod Divas. Thousands would be lighting lamps to commemorate the release of the sixth Sikh Guru from captivity. Back at the shopping mall, vendors say Wednesday and Thursdays are expected to be the busiest as thousands descend to shop for their favorite Diwali items. That hard work is already done for Dhoot. The 7-hour drive home is going to be so much sweeter. Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, Surrey.
It is a problem anyone who has been pregnant knows all too well. Sometimes just getting around with a big baby bump or a new baby is not easy, especially if you have to take public transit. As Nicole Williams shows us, officials in Toronto are looking at a plan to make sure rides on buses, streetcars, and the subways are a little easier for moms and moms-to-be.
It's an idea that the chair of Canada's largest transit system is hoping encourages riders to be a little more courteous. It's looking into giving out baby on board badges for new and expectant mothers to let others know to offer their seat. The Toronto Transit Commission taking inspiration from across the pond.
Give the Duchess a little extra present, a new baby on board.
London's transit authority has been issuing baby on board badges for the last decade, now issuing about 100,000 of them a year.
A woman in London, when she becomes pregnant, it's sort of it can be a bit of a rite of passage, sort of getting the baby on board badge. It really does make a difference.
Here in Toronto, this button maker has already been selling a version of his own for years after a request from a pregnant customer.
It made a lot of people think about why we didn't have such a thing here and why the TTC didn't have an initiative already for something like that.
In fact, his partner is currently expecting and says she regrets not wearing one of the badges during a recent train ride.
I was a bit surprised to notice that nobody offered their seat on a busy train. Luckily, it wasn't the longest ride in the world, but I was pretty visibly pregnant at the time.
Though not everyone's so sure they'll make a difference.
I'm finding that most of those pregnant people are not really wanting to take public transportation because they are overcrowded. They don't feel like it's a very safe space for them to be in.
But it's still an idea some Toronto City councillors want to explore in the hopes of making some people's rides a little bit more comfortable. And it just might inspire other Canadian cities to get on board. Nicole Williams, CBC News, Toronto.
American Airlines is testing new technology to try to curb passengers from cutting in line. Their solution? Little public shaming. We'll explain that after this. Welcome back. In a few minutes, we'll find out how American Airlines is testing a system to catch line jumpers at the boarding gate. And with the U.S. Election Day a week away, we take a closer look at the battleground state of Pennsylvania. But we're going to start this hour with a report on Russia's war on Ukraine and the latest from the Middle East crisis.
I'm Sasha Petrusik, following some horrific developments in Gaza today. Rescuers spent the day pulling bodies out of a single apartment building that was hit in an Israeli airstrike overnight. It's an area where some 100,000 people are effectively trapped because of Israeli military operations that have been going on there for a couple of weeks. Aid is also not coming in, and that is one of the big problems for those who have survived. Legislation passed by the Israeli government effectively bans UNRWA from operating in Israel and therefore from operating in the occupied West Bank, the annexed East Jerusalem, and most critically in Gaza. UNRWA is the main UN aid organization that takes care of Palestinian refugees in this area. Israel, for a long time, has accused UNRWA of allowing Hamas militants to use schools, shelters, and other facilities that are run by the UN as bases for attacks against Israeli forces or as command centers, entrances into their tunnels. UNRWA denies that. Israel's other accusation is that a handful of UNRWA employees out of about 13,000 were involved in one way or another in the attacks from October 7th, a year ago, and that as a result, UNRWA is not vetting these people properly, allowing these militants to operate under its noses. UNRWA says that's not the case, and if they have any indication that someone is a suspected militant, that those people are purged from UNRWA itself. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Jerusalem.
I'm Crystal Gamansing in London. Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific security is being raised as ties deepen between Pyongyang and Moscow. North Korea's foreign minister is in Russia, one day after NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte expressed concern about North Korean troops being on the ground in Russia.
The deployment of North Korean troops represents one, a significant escalation in the DPRK's ongoing involvement in Russia's illegal war. Two, yet another breach of UN Security Council resolutions. And three, a dangerous expansion of Russia's war.
Very few details about Cho Sun-Hui's trip have been made public. NATO, the U.S., and now South Korea have all shared intelligence detailing the presence of North Korean troops in Russia and the possibility that they could be deployed to the front line in Russia's war against Ukraine.
It undermines peace on the Korean peninsula and fuels the Russian war against Ukraine.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke with South Korea's president by phone on Tuesday, with the possibility of a new phase in the war and the potential for new troops to be on the front line. South Korea may soon directly start supplying Ukraine with weapons. Now, last June, North Korea and Russia signed a mutual security pact, and it's that treaty that resulted in North Korea's foreign minister visiting Russia. Crystal Gamansing, CBC News, London.
The U.S. Supreme Court is being asked to decide a legal fight over voting rules in one of the battleground states. Republicans in Pennsylvania want a state court ruling on mail-in ballots overturned. The legal fight is over what are called naked ballots. Those are mail-in votes that were posted or put in drop boxes without a special envelope called a secrecy sleeve. The state court ruling allows people to vote provisionally if they had that problem with their mail-in ballot, and Republicans want to block that. They argue tens of thousands of votes could be affected by the decision and are asking for a ruling by Friday. Polling forecasts suggest it will be the decisive state this time round. And as Angie Seth tells us, polls show it's even tighter this time.
The driving issues in Pennsylvania are reproductive rights and health care, along with the economy and inflation. Case in point, the price of groceries has risen faster there than in any other state. Of the 13 million people living in the state, the majority are white. But there is a growing immigrant population, which both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump will need to convince to win their vote. Harris has maintained a lead in this state since August, but in the last several days, Donald Trump has gained momentum, now leading the state by a very slim margin, and he's using that momentum to push against the Democrats and Kamala Harris.
People aren't excited about this country very much anymore with the people we have in there. We have the worst president in the history of our country. We have the worst vice president, a grossly incompetent person.
Trump won the state back in 2016, lost it to Joe Biden by 82,000 votes in 2020. To win it back and the presidency, he needs to win Philadelphia. Meantime, the Democrats had the lion's share of support in Pennsylvania back in 2012 at 85%. Years later, it has shrunk to 81%. Harris now trying to gain momentum back with the Gen Z vote.
Now, here's the thing I love about you young leaders. You know, you are rightly impatient for change. You are rightly impatient. You who have only known the climate crisis, you are leaders in what we need to do to protect our planet.
In order to win Pennsylvania, Harris needs to focus on the suburbs. Once again, enter Philadelphia. Key races in Pennsylvania to watch for will be Philadelphia Metro and Pittsburgh Metro. Today marks the last day for early voting and mail-in ballots. Angie Seth, CBC News, Toronto.
I'm Sophia Harris in Toronto. American Airlines is testing new technology that outs passengers who try to board before they're supposed to. But not everyone thinks public shaming is the best way to solve the problem.
You've probably been there.
We invite customers in Zone 1 to board now.
Your flight starts boarding, and some passengers cut in line before their zone is called.
Like, there isn't enough carry-on baggage storage, so people do want to get on as early as possible to ensure that their bag isn't gate checked.
Have you ever tried to board before your zone is called to secure carry-on space?
For sure, yeah. A lot of the time it's really tight, and they definitely don't account for everyone to have like a carry-on.
To combat the queue jumping problem, American Airlines is testing new technology at the gate at several U.S. airports.
This is how it works. When a passenger who cut the line tries to get their boarding pass scanned, the technology beeps, and the passenger is told to wait their turn.
I think it's fair, to be honest, but I mean, I wouldn't like to be called out. But I guess, like, there's zones for a reason, right?
But traveler Robert Stinson isn't on board.
I don't think public shaming is the way to go about it. It makes the people angry, and do we need more angry people at the airport? I don't really think so.
This industry expert says instead of nabbing line cutters, airlines should enforce their rules for carry-on baggage limits.
The airlines themselves are causing the problem. People are walking on with 2, 3, 4 pieces of hand baggage, and that just chews up all the space on the airplane.
Perhaps a crackdown is in the works. Air Canada passenger Stinson says he was surprised to learn he can't carry on this bag.
So your carry-on is oversized?
Yeah, apparently. I was forced to check it today.
Air Canada didn't respond to requests for comment about lack of carry-on space. American Airlines says gate agents will politely ask outed queue jumpers to follow the rules and that its technology was designed to improve the boarding experience. Sophia Harris, CBC News, Toronto.
Darius Madavi here with our BC-wide weather forecast, and something moving across our coast now.
Yes, that's right. So you can actually kind of see the front that's moving in here. Yeah, pretty clearly, right? This is a water vapor satellite, and I also wanted to point out. Thank you. Let's see if they hold up. It's a lot of data.
Lord willing.
You can also see all this moisture feeding in up in the northwest. There's actually some snow fall warnings in place and winter storm warnings up in Whitehorse and the surrounding area, as well as just barely dipping into BC. So I wanted to highlight that as well, because even though we got some rain on the way, could be a lot worse. We could be getting a massive dump of 15 to 20 centimeters of snow. So let's be glad we're not. We've got some wind warnings in place, though, as I mentioned earlier. Again, east coast of the island and the South Island expecting to see winds up to 70 kilometers per hour, gusting up to 90. The North Island, as well as Haida Gwaii, actually seeing those winds up to 100, gusting up to 110 kilometers per hour. So definitely very significant. The rainfall, though, is on the way. We're not going to see too high accumulations. We'll look at the numbers in a second, but I want to highlight when it's coming, mostly overnight tonight, although the rain could be starting within the next few hours for parts of the island and then working its way inland, although we've probably got a good maybe 5 to 8 hours of rain here in Vancouver, and none of it too heavy, so don't expect to see massive accumulations of rain or anything like that. Really just a passing wave of precipitation. And if we take a look here, you can see across BC, it's a pretty similar story. And as we head into Thursday, things really start to dry out. So don't expect to see any massive downpours during trick-or-treating time. Maybe a few showers popping up in a few places, maybe a drizzle, but nothing too significant. If we take a look at our accumulations, you can see here most of that rain coming to the coast, although a few showers breaking into parts of the interior at times. Most of that rain, where we see the highest accumulations, are on the west coast of the island. Not unusual by any means, but here in Metro Vancouver, even the North Shore not getting too much rain. Up the sea to sky, maybe a bit more, maybe 20 to 40 millimeters for places like Squamish and Whistler, but still nothing that we're expecting to see any flooding or anything like that. Our highs aren't fluctuating too much over the next few days, maybe coming up a little bit in the north, but then dropping back down as we head closer to the weekend. So again, nothing that exciting. Dan, it's a pretty consistent, I mean, it's variable because it's autumn, but it's also nothing too exciting. Again, unless you're up in the very far northwest. And then a little bit of sun down in the southeast and pretty much everywhere else. A few showers, a little bit of cloud building into tomorrow. And in terms of a 5-day forecast, as promised, a little bit of rain tomorrow. I do think actually I should remove that sun icon. That's my bad. Pretty cloudy tomorrow.
See that you do.
And then things seem pretty dry for the rest of the week.
Variable and consistent. We have our costumes for Halloween. Thanks, pal.
Thank you.
There's a new hobby growing in Metro Vancouver, competitive pumpkin growing, don't you know? After the break, we take a look at the gourd that came in second in a local competition. Some call it a hobby, but to others, it's a sport.
Any way you carve it, the competitive pumpkin growing community is strong here in Metro Vancouver. Our Karis Hogg checked out a new Westminster man's pumpkin that won second place in a local battle.
This year I've grown my personal best pumpkin. It's quite large. It weighed in at 1,059 pounds.
Wow.
It has a circumference of about 10 feet, and the shape of it this year is pretty fantastic because it's round. This is my 9th year, and it comes with a lot of heartache because I think I've only ever gotten 4 pumpkins to the scale. Sometimes they explode, they crack, they rot.
And what happens when your pumpkin cracks? I mean, what does that do to you?
Well, the first few years I cried. You know, and then it's just like, it's devastation because there's so much work and effort that goes into these things.
I mean, to me, this pumpkin is huge.
Yeah.
But in the world of competitive pumpkin growing, this pumpkin is...
Let's just say I think I ranked about 500th in the world this year.
Okay.
With this pumpkin. So you can imagine there's way bigger and better pumpkins.
And now you took this to a local competition. Did you have any expectations of where you might place?
I was hoping for top 5. Like I said, everyone's in the community and you kind of hear what everyone's pumpkin's at and whether they're going to take it to the States or...
Are those competitions kind of like the NHL of competitive pumpkin growing and the competition here locally is kind of like the AHL?
Absolutely. I would say the competition here is kind of like high school.
Oh, really?
You know, in comparison, you know, because like the competition in the States, I would say that's the Stanley Cup final.
Okay.
You know, where they're paying that big money. And if you break the world record, they pay $30,000 if you break the world record at these competitions. So
if you did grow a bigger pumpkin than this in your yard, would you consider taking it to the U.S.?
I doubt it. I want to support the local event and try to get, hopefully we can get a sponsor here soon enough and then keep all these local pumpkins, you know, here and grow a bigger fan base, if you want to call it that.
Hi, I'm Jeff Pelche, and I'm a giant pumpkin grower and the local BC rep for the Great Pumpkin Commonwealth.
What is the Great Pumpkin Commonwealth? Can you explain that to me?
It has some Canadian roots. So one of the most famous giant pumpkin growers is Howard Dill, and he actually started the whole strain of Atlantic giant pumpkins. He was very popular on the scene in the 80s and started breaking world records consecutive year after year. So because he was so popular, he started this group of growers, and eventually that's what became the Great Pumpkin Commonwealth, which now spans sort of its worldwide reach. It just continues to grow in popularity. So part of that is this collegial atmosphere where you have these competitions, but it's really people supporting each other, trying to get to the next milestone. And so there's a lot of seed trading. It's all in an effort to try and keep getting the totals bigger and bigger. I have a pumpkin seed in my seed library that I haven't yet grown because it is one of the world's most expensive seeds right now because it has grown more pumpkins in excess of 2,500 pounds.
And how much does that seed cost?
This one I've seen go as high as $750. Yes.
So you're holding on to this incredibly expensive seed. Is this like an incredibly valuable bottle of wine that you're just waiting for the right occasion to open and enjoy?
Not necessarily, because the time is ticking. So a pumpkin seed can typically only be germinated for about 10 years. And then after that, it'll start losing its ability to be sprouted. I'm either waiting to give it to someone who can really push what it has to offer. Like, you know, genetically, you want to make sure you're pushing the plant. But there's also an opportunity that if I could find a greenhouse to grow it in, then I would do that myself. So.
What is the competitive pumpkin growing scene like here?
It's friendly. You know, we share tips, we share tricks. We all know what seed we're growing and how we're growing it, and we all support each other. Yeah, it's great. Who doesn't want to see a giant pumpkin? Everyone smiles at a giant pumpkin.
Right?
Yeah.
But how did she get down? It's a big pumpkin.
She's still up there.
That's true. And if you got a problem, you want a gourd you want to show off, you call the GPC.
Okay. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6.
We'll have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. Good night.